If a parallel version of yourself is sending you signs from another dimension, how would you know? Maybe you're intrigued by the concept of the many worlds theory and the possibility of accessing other dimensions, like scientists are currently trying to do. Well, how do we connect with them? Maybe you've had a bizarre experience where you called someone out of the blue and they said, "Weird, I was just thinking about you." Or you dreamed you just did something specific that later actually came true. Where did those thoughts come from? Maybe you're someone who considers yourself an empath and you're interested in manifestation, or you feel a metaphysical connection to something bigger than yourself and already know you get messages from somewhere beyond. Of course, maybe you also just like watching Marvel movies, Stranger Things, or Rick and Morty, where parallel realities come alive through entertainment. But whichever category you fall into, from skeptic to spiritualist, the idea of parallel universes and even parallel lives is something that's hit basically every segment of society. The big questions are, is there a deeper reason why? If signs are happening, is there any proof? And what could the mysterious messages from another dimension be desperately trying to tell you? Join me, Rob Counts, for a metaphysical show that's out of this world. In the 1980s, Cleve Baxter did experiments on whether extrasensory perception, ESP, could be detected at the cellular level. He was an expert in lie detectors, which measured people's heart rates, respiration, and galvanic skin response to reveal people's emotional states. Well, in one experiment, he took white blood cells from participants and hooked the cells up to the EEG machine instead of the person. The cells were kept in another room away from the person they came from. But get this, they began reflecting the person's emotions, even from a distance.
We're really talking about a kind of extrasensory perception down at cellular level. White cells are an integral part of the human immune system. And from what we can find, the white cells are very, very sensitive to the emotionality of the donor of those cells.
Participants were asked a number of pointed questions designed to arouse their emotions, like about politics and relationships. The people weren't hooked up to anything, but the detached, living cells appeared to reflect their emotions exactly as they had them. Just look at when the pen jumped when this woman was being interviewed. It was exactly the same time she was having different emotions. Cleve Baxter wanted to see how much distance they could put between the woman and her cells before it stopped working. So they sent her to a high crime area of San Diego and kept the cells in the lab several miles away. Any anxiety she felt during the walk was experienced by the cells back in the lab, and they caught it all on camera. Think of the implications here. Would this still work between cells on Earth and astronauts in space? Could there be instantaneous communication even that far away, and we'd know when astronauts were having problems out there? Our thoughts have a greater power than we ever imagined.
Anything that involves anger or hostility creates a great disruption in the electrical activity in these cells that we are testing. It means that people should be very, very careful of the quality of their thinking. Don't think negative, think positive thoughts.
In my episode on accessing other people's minds and proof of the quantum hologram, which, by the way, you should totally check out if you haven't, I talked about real mind experiments done by astronaut Edgar Mitchell behind NASA's back while he was out in space. He tried to send thoughts to Earth without any verbal communication and see if they could be received. Indeed, regardless of space and time, his thoughts were received back on Earth. So this is getting pretty trippy, right? How does this actually work? Quantum entanglement in science could also prove we're part of something larger. It says that if two particles are entangled or part of the same system, then no matter how far apart they are, if you know information about one, it tells you instantaneous information about the other. So if you knew info about a particle here on Earth, if it's entangled with a particle across the galaxy, you'd know info about that regardless of the distance and time between them. That same concept could extend to larger objects than little particles, like maybe even your human body, and maybe parallel yous in other dimensions. What if white blood cells are like all the other bodies you have in all the other dimensions, and together they work in a union to resolve a problem across dimensional spaces? That's the episode we're in today. Scientists theorize that if the Big Bang created our universe with its many galaxies, planets, and stars, then it probably wasn't the only universe that was created at that time. Outside of our universe, there could be more universes also filled with their own galaxies, planets, and stars. That's why they call it the many worlds theory, and if we look at the nature of our universe as we know it, we might be able to prove it. Inside our bodies are cells and molecules and atoms, and even further on down, there's more. When I was a kid, I remember seeing a model of an atom, and instantly it popped into my head, oh, this is a little solar system. Well, what if you really jumped down into that dimension where things were as big as the planets and stars are here? Would it seem like a solar system? Some scientists believe that quantum computers operate in other dimensions. Geordie Rose, who founded the D-Wave quantum computing company, said in a presentation, imagine that there really are parallel universes out there, and now imagine you have two that are exactly identical in every respect, down to the last little atomic detail of every single thing with only one difference. And that's the value of a little thing called a qubit on this chip, which is a contraction of quantum bit. And that qubit is very much like a bit or transistor in a conventional computer. It has two distinct physical states, which we call 0 and 1 for bit. In a conventional computer, these are mutually exclusive. That device is either one or the other and never anything else. But Geordie Rose went on to describe how in quantum computers, reality gets shaken up.
In a quantum computer, that device can be in this strange situation where these two parallel universes have a nexus, a point in space where they overlap. And when you increase the number of these devices, every time you add one of these qubits, you double the number of these parallel universes that you have access to. So the way I think about it is that the shadows of these parallel worlds overlap with ours. And if we're smart enough, we can dive into them and grab their resources and pull them back into ours.
So qubits represent multiple possibilities at once, and quantum computers don't have to solve one solution to a problem at a time, but can explore a vast number of answers all at the same time. If those scientists are right that quantum computing works in other dimensions, or the computer could just look for which dimension has the correct solution to a problem and then bring it back here, that's pretty mind-blowing. Parallel dimensions could be confirmed. We already know that social media and marketing companies are creating digital twins of us right now, gathering information on each person with where they're traveling to, the products we buy, the places our eyes linger on a screen as an ad pops up, and way crazier data. What if, since everything is made of energy, that digital twin they're forming is also one of the parallel versions of ourselves. Just like how when we make any decision, the timeline could be branching off into a parallel self too. I'll get into some time theory soon, but first we need to talk about if other dimensions are real, and we exist in them too, then how would we know if we were receiving messages from them? Let's dive into impossible coincidences and signs from beyond. One January night, a good friend of mine was doom scrolling on social media. Work and life pressures were becoming heavy weights on her shoulders, and her thoughts kept focusing on how overwhelming everything was to handle. All she could do was wonder, how am I going to make it through? Mid-scroll, she saw a meme that said, the song that was #1 on your 24th birthday is how your 2024 will play out. It's something she'd normally keep scrolling past, but for some reason she stopped doom scrolling to look up exactly what that #1 song was in 2018. The top hit on Google was a song called God's Plan. If a parallel version of you were trying to tell you something, how would you know? I mean, I've never gotten a text message from myself in a parallel dimension saying, hey Rob, someone's about to hit and run your parked car while you're working on this episode in a coffee shop, which would have been nice because that actually happened to me. Is it possible? Sure, who knows whether people have interdimensional iPhones somewhere out there. But more likely, if you were getting contacted from a parallel self, one way you'd know would be these strange synchronicities that point you to a certain direction, or signs that clue you into something only you understand. Ever looked at the clock exactly when it turns 11:11? And it happens to you over and over, even in different places. Synchronicities happen when little coincidences start piling up, all having to do with something particular. Somehow, they all seem connected, but you can't explain how or even why it's happening. One of the most common ways people start receiving these messages is when they start seeing the same words or numbers everywhere, but it goes way deeper than that. Some people spot literal signs on shops or streets or license plates around them telling them something when they really need to hear it, or they hear a song with exactly the lyrics they need to help them feel like they're not alone. The weird part is that so many other people are walking past the same objects or hearing the same songs, but the exact moment you notice them, it's like it was meant for you to see. If that's true, then your life and even time is like a symphony of arrangements by design that go far beyond what human beings are able to comprehend. Maybe you could brush off those coincidences even when they're coming at you one after another, right when you're at a fork in the road. But what about synchronistic experiences that are harder to explain away, like messages that come to you in dreams? On my Dreams Are Real episode, I got literally thousands of comments with people sharing their own experiences of dream premonitions, where they saw something in a dream that came true in real life, and some defy all logical explanations. One person commented that their mother had a dream where her grandmother, who'd passed away, gave her an ominous warning: he's coming. In the dream, she saw her grandfather, who disappeared and never returned about 18 years ago, driving in a black truck. Fast forward to when she was awake, out of the blue, the grandfather reached out and showed up at the house in a black Bronco. Why the dream warning? She said the grandfather had been a very dangerous man who put her grandmother through hell, and she'd had nightmares about him until the day she died. By the time he reappeared all those years later, he was a harmless and delusional old man. But that dream experience was what made the granddaughter believe in messages from beyond. So what would explain this impossible kind of intuition meant to protect someone from danger or give them a warning before something happens? I had to consider the possibility. Let's say there are parallel realities where you also exist. One explanation for synchronicities is that your mind could be tuning into those parallel realities where you exist. In a dream, maybe you're really seeing things that you're experiencing somewhere else or scenes from the future. In that other universe, Grandma's still alive and she's telling you something. In your dream, you just tuned in and brought it back here. But bizarre synchronicities and coincidences like funny feelings and intuition or strange dreams and signs are only one type of proof if we're really receiving messages from other dimensions. Another way we'd know we're getting these messages would be through strange glitches in the Matrix that are specific only to you, and even time warps themselves. I'm about to dive into that next, but first, a quick reminder to like and subscribe to the Metaphysical channel to make sure you don't miss out on any updates or content drops. All your support lets us keep making this content, so thanks a lot for watching. Now on to the time warps and glitches in the Matrix. In 2022, someone I know was taking a bus from their home in upstate New York into the big city because they were going to be interviewed by a news company about what it was like to grow up in the USSR under communist Soviet control. The journey should have been an hour and a half or even 2 hours with traffic, so it was worrisome whether they'd get there on time. My friend told me, quote, "I asked the heavens to help me and get me to the city quick because the studio was booked for a specific time only. I was there in 45 minutes. They got me there in the blink of an eye. Plus, I was early, so I had a chance to prepare better. Somehow, my friend made it to their destination in a way faster time than should have been possible. It was an unexplainable case of time travel that could never be proved, but that had definitely been experienced. And this has happened to way more people, too." Another person said that around 2002, she was on a plane with her dad and stepmom making their way from California to Tennessee. Once they landed, the dad turned on his phone to call her aunt, who would be waiting for them at the airport. Something was a little off, though. There were a ton of missed calls from the aunt freaking out about where they were because she'd been waiting for them for 2.5 hours. They were super confused because their flight got there in a normal amount of time without delays, but somehow they'd lost 2.5 hours of their time, not counting the time change across the country. So could the aunt have just made a mistake about the time her family was arriving? Bizarrely, down at the baggage claim, their carousel was completely empty of luggage and other passengers. They had to pick up their baggage somewhere else because it had been unclaimed for too long. They double-checked their flight number with airport employees who said that their plane had indeed landed 2.5 hours before, But for the three of them, everything happened as soon as they got off the plane with no delay. Why did they experience this time warp? She said that they had felt very weird and surreal for the rest of the night, and she still has no idea how they lost that much time. I'd say that was a pretty obvious example of a personal glitch in the Matrix. You know, Marvel has a series called Loki based on the idea of the multiverse, or multiple dimensions existing. Each time a choice is made, the timeline breaks into a new timeline, like branches on a tree. Well, maybe that idea isn't that far off, and maybe we sometimes find ourselves on a new branch of that timeline while other branches still exist. Lots of people get déjà vu. The common way people brush it off is that your brain is firing false signals, making you just think you've experienced something before. Sounds like a normal scientific explanation for something that is more metaphysical. But what if that déjà vu were actually some sort of signal that something really isn't quite right? If parallel U's in other dimensions really exist, then maybe the only way you'd be able to know about these other timelines and U's is by these little glitches or déjà vu fingerprints that leave behind physical evidence. One of the most interesting theories about parallel timelines and branching universes is the burnt toast theory. You ever heard of that one? Forbes summed it up really well. Quote, imagine burning your toast in the morning, causing you to leave the house a few minutes later than planned. While it seems like an annoyance, that delay could have unknowingly prevented you from getting caught in a traffic accident or helped you cross paths with someone who changes your day for the better. Could even change your life. But if that ever really happened to you, how would you know? You'd have avoided the danger or car wreck or something, and you'd never even know about it. But maybe you didn't avoid it on another timeline, and some parallel version of you set you on a course to avoid that future. The best example in our own reality is the 9/11 terrorist attack. There were several people who were late to work that day and avoided a tragic fate for what seemed like no reason at all. 30-year-old Todd Wall was one of these people. He worked for a company in one of the Twin Towers, but survived.
I almost always, while I'm getting dressed, I'm listening to the Howard Stern show.
Wall would usually wait for Stern to go to break before he would leave for work. But on September 11th, 2001, he decided to keep listening.
For some reason, I was captivated by the show, and I was just waiting for him to go to commercial.
Stern's show finally went to a commercial, and Wall headed for work. After emerging from the subway, he was running down Church Street and heard a deafening sound.
The butterfly effect is similar to this burnt toast theory. If a butterfly flaps its wings in one place, maybe what seemed like minor movements compile to create conditions that eventually contribute to a tornado later. The implications of our small decisions and thoughts may have major consequences too, sometimes for the better, which I'll get into soon. So at this point, I'm pretty open to there being parallel realities and even parallel versions of me. If I were getting messages from somewhere, there would be synchronicities, time being funny, I'd be burning my toast to save me from devastation somewhere down the road, and maybe having déjà vu. But that brings up more questions than answers. How are people miraculously in the right place at the right time? And if they're not already, how do they get nudged onto a course that puts them there? How can all these coincidental experiences be explained if they're real? This is where science and spirituality collide in the multiverse. So where do we go from here? What could explain all these messages from parallel selves? Psychologists and neuroscientists have guessed that people have a collective unconscious that's inherent to the brain, meaning everyone has similar instincts, inherited images, and a universal human psyche. Some have gone beyond this explanation to say that if everything is made of energy and frequencies, including you, then you can tap into that collective knowledge of our universe. Spiritual people sometimes call this accessing the Akashic records, or collection of all thoughts, feelings, and events that have ever happened in history. Religions have called this the Book of Life, where people's entire lives are recorded, and some believe that in a certain dimension, your entire life already exists there from the time you're born, and maybe even more than one lifetime. I think about it this way. If you have a bug flying around in your car as you're driving on the highway, why doesn't the bug hit the windshield at 70 miles an hour? The air inside the car moves with the car, and the bug moves with that air. So, as an analogy, if you're within one time field or one dimension, then you're pretty restricted by that time and space. If you're not within that time field, then you're not restricted by it. So if a you in a parallel dimension isn't restricted by our time here, then it could be possible to send us messages. The question is, how do they do it? Well, we're mostly made up of gaps because there's a ton of space between our cells and molecules. If you could see people like a big jiggling ball of molecules and atoms, then you'd see tons of stuff passing through us all the time, like neutrinos and even your Wi-Fi. If something smaller than neutrinos vibrating at certain frequencies were able to match the frequencies here instead of just passing through us, it would be pretty easy to influence us. Maybe all you'd have to do to reach another dimension is match its vibration, literally and spiritually. If your thoughts are vibing on the quality of good things, then good things literally come to you. If your mind is operating short of that, then that dimension is locked no matter how much you want to access it until you reach that vibe. A lot of people talk about manifestation, so I think it's good to point out that your brain is just a processing tool, not the center of your thoughts. Your thoughts and emotions are pretty easy to change, like when you're around a really upbeat group of people and feel happy, or you're around a really depressed person and aren't feeling very good. The good news is that intrusive thoughts may not be yours after all. Thinking, I'm clumsy, I'm a failure, I'm a bad person, isn't permanent, just an internal monologue that's building up a false reality. Maybe the true reality is these little signs and messages you're receiving to get you back on the right track. That would explain these miraculous survivals, synchronicities, and time warps. It would also explain how inner demons people have may actually be real ones, or at least energy in other dimensions. So if you don't want those interfering frequencies, you can manifest better ones by actively working on changing your thoughts. There seem to be interdimensional loopholes at work here where the energies of other dimensions can affect us. I mean, when you're sitting there alone and you have a random humiliating memory of something you did in 4th grade, that happens to me all the time, where does that actually come from? When you have a burst of inspiration after you've taken a break from your work, well, where does that come from? The power of the mind is an incredibly strong thing, and if we master it, then your feelings and emotions can be replaced by anything you want. So tell me, what are your other selves trying desperately to tell you from the great beyond? One thing is for sure, your other selves are out there. Maybe all you have to do to reach them is to realize when it's happening. But what do you think? Have you started hacking your own consciousness yet, or raising your vibration? What do you think is causing these signs from beyond? If you've ever had an impossible thing happen to you, leave me a comment because maybe you'll make it into a future episode like some of the examples in this one. Remember to like and subscribe to the Metaphysical channel so you don't miss out on any updates or content drops, and let us know what kind of crazy concepts you want us to do shows on in the future. If you want to support my work and get access to bonus content, you can subscribe to the metaphysical.tv, where I have more than 1,000 videos on mysteries, ancient civilizations, and more. So you're not just supporting our channel, you're getting a whole lot in return. And there's a big shout out I want to give to all of our current subscribers because we really couldn't keep making this content without all of you guys. I love you guys. Thank you for supporting us. If you'd like to get yourself a bag of Metaphysical coffee, yeah, we're making coffee now, visit the links in the description as well. Thanks so much for watching, and with that, I hope you thought this episode was out of this world.